morning, dear students. In last class, we have begun discussing about the basic shapes of finite elements. In previous class, we had discussed about one-dimensional line element. One-dimensional line element contains two nodes. This is node 1, this is node 2. Each node has 1 degree of freedom, which is translation. This type of element we can use to model a bar loaded in tension, loaded in compression. This type of element we can also use for a problem involving temperature distribution in a rod of circular cross section. And this type of element we can also choose for a fluid flowing through a pipe. So these are the examples where we consider one-dimensional element to idealize the domain. Right? Next one. So this is also a one-dimensional element, but this type of element we can choose for one-dimensional beam problems. One-dimensional beam problems. Let us see. If you take a beam like this, say simply supported beam, with central load, this beam bends in the form of arc of the circle. It bends in the form of arc of the circle like this. Right? So what we determine here? We determine the beam deflection and the slope. So therefore, if you consider a point on the neutral axis of this beam, it consists of 2 degrees of freedom. The first degree of freedom is beam deflection, and the second degree of freedom is slope. So therefore, when you consider a point, it consists of 2 degrees of freedom. 2 degrees of freedom. So this is the reason why you can use one-dimensional beam element for one-dimensional beam problems. How many nodes? It connects 2 nodes. This is node 1, this is node. At each node there are 2 degrees of freedom. So this is the degree of freedom representing beam deflection or displacement. And this is the degree of freedom representing slope of the beam. So how many degrees of freedom are there in this one-dimensional beam element? 4 degrees of freedom. Hence you can name it 2-noded beam element with 2 degrees of freedom at each node. 2 degrees of freedom at each node. Right? Next. We can idealize the 2-dimensional domains using 2-dimensional elements. When you choose the 2-dimensional elements, so when the domain, the material properties and the field variables are dependent on 2 independent coordinates, we can choose 2-dimensional elements. When the geometry of the domain, material properties and the field variables are dependent on 2 independent coordinates, we can choose 2-dimensional elements. So best example, a plate Consider a plate. A plate loaded under the action of several forces like this. So here, this end is fixed. This is a wide plate of uniform thickness. It is loaded like this. How many forces are acting? Two forces are acting in the given directions. So this is theta 1, this is theta. So this problem you can consider as a two-dimensional problem, because the thickness of this plate is very small as compared to the length and depth. You can consider it a plane stress case. For plane stress case, you can consider two-dimensional elements. Two-dimensional elements. So this is an example, right? Now, the basic form of the two-dimensional element is a triangle. This is the basic. It has three nodes. Node 1, node 2, node 3. At each node, there are 2 degrees of freedom. At each node, there are 2 degrees of freedom. They are translations. For example, this is the node 1 which has 1 degree of freedom like this, in this direction. 1 degree of freedom. And the same node has another degree of freedom like this. Each node has 2 degrees of freedom. If you consider a reference frame like this, x-axis like this and y-axis like this, in the direction of x-axis, node 1 has 1 degree of freedom. And in the direction of y-axis, the same node has another degree of freedom like this. Each node has 2 degrees of freedom. They are translations. They represent displacements. Now, node 3 has 2 degrees of freedom like this. And node 2 has 2 degrees of freedom like this. In total, how many degrees of freedom are there in this element? 6 degrees of freedom. This is a triangle, a 3-noded triangle. This type of element we can choose to discretize a 2-dimensional domain of this type. So I explain. Listen to me carefully. So now, I take a wide plate like this. One end is fixed. Now, this plate is loaded under the action of 2 forces. P1 is acting in the given direction and P2 is also acting in the given direction. Now, what is the domain here? The plate is the domain. It is a 2-dimensional domain because the thickness is same. The thickness is uniform. So here, this geometry is described only in 2 independent coordinates. What are they? Say x and y. If I consider a reference frame like this, x-axis like this, and y-axis like this, with coordinate origin here, I draw it separate. So this is the domain, 2-dimensional domain, where the coordinate origin is here. X-axis is taken like this, and y-axis is taken like this. Now, so discretize this domain. To discretize this domain, you have to choose the element suitably, the finite element suitably. You have to choose the suitable finite element. I say the suitable element is triangle. Now, so can you discretize this plate into 2 triangles like this? Yes. This is one triangle. This is another triangle. 2 finite elements are there. The whole domain is divided into 2 subdomains, 2 finite elements. Okay? This is one element. If you isolate it and draw, this element appears like this. And if you isolate it and draw separately, the element appears like this. Two finite elements are. This is element 2, this is element. Okay? Right? Now, it has how many nodes? 3 nodes. 1, 2 and 3. So, where is location here? This is the corresponding location of this element. Right? So, this is the corresponding location of this element. How many nodes are there here? 3 nodes. I can say this is node 1, this is node 2, this is node 3. 3 nodes. It has 6 degrees of freedom with 2 degrees of freedom at each node. That is what we have to understand. With 2 degrees of freedom at each node. Right? Okay. Now, next one. This is also a 2-dimensional element. It is a rectangle. It has 4 nodes. 1, 2, 3 and 4. At each node, there are 2 degrees of freedom. This is 1 degree of freedom. This is another degree of freedom. Because there are 4 nodes, how many degrees of freedom are there? 8 degrees of freedom. So when we can choose this type of element, when the domain is simply a perfect rectangle. When the domain is simply a perfect rectangle. Right? We can choose this type of element to discretize a 2-dimensional domain. Next one. And third type, it is parallelogram. It is parallelogram. So here, opposite sides are equal and parallel. How many nodes? It has 4 nodes. Right? Now, each node has 2 degrees of freedom, like this. So therefore, it is a 4-noded 2-dimensional element. It is a parallelogram. Okay? You can also observe the degrees of freedom at other nodes like this. Right? Next one. This one. This is a quadrilateral. It connects 4 nodes. Each node has 2 degrees of freedom. Each node has 2 degrees of freedom. In total, how many degrees of freedom are there? 8 degrees of freedom. The advantage of this quadrilateral is it can replace 2 triangular elements. 2 triangular elements. It can replace 2 triangular elements. Let us see. For example, I take a 2-dimensional domain like this. This is a 2-dimensional domain. This domain you can divide into several subdomains choosing a triangle. A triangle. Now, I divide like this. This domain I divide like this. How many triangles are there? This is first, second, third, fourth. 4 finite elements are there. So this is a node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, node 5, node 6. 6 nodes are there. At each node, we observe 2 degrees of freedom. Hence, in total, in this domain, how many degrees of freedom are there? 12. 12 degrees of freedom are there. And how many elements are there? 4 elements are there. Okay? I can name this model, this finite element model, 4 element 6 noded model, or you can say 6 noded 4 element model, because in this model 4 elements are there, 6 nodes are there. Right. Now, see here, as I said, a quadrilateral can replace 2 triangles. How it can replace? I tell you. If I choose one triangle like this and another triangle adjacent to it like this, how many elements are there? 2 elements are there, 2 triangles. Both triangles you can replace by a quadrilateral. Thereby, what is happening here? The number of elements is reduced. In fact, how many elements are there? 2 elements are there. Both elements are replaced by only 1 element. That is the advantage of quadrilateral. Right? So when the number of elements decreases, what happens? The computation time also decreases. And the computer also requires less storage. And this is a classroom problem. When you take a problem beyond the classroom, it contains, it consists of many elements. Take the problem of aircraft structure. The domain, if you discretize, what is the domain here? The body of the aircraft structure. If you discretize the body into subdomains, so millions of subdomains we observe. Such a problem you can solve with the help of computer only. Millions of nodes we observe. Millions of degrees of freedom we observe. So there, the storage problems will arise. Therefore, as an engineer, you have to look for the solution with less computation time. You have to look for the solution which gives us, at faster time. Right? So therefore, when you replace, this is a small example, when you replace these 2 elements by a single element like this. Okay? The computer requires less storage. Now here, how many elements are there? 4 elements are there. See here, these 2 elements can you combine? Yes, you can combine these 2 triangles. The resulting one will be a quadrilateral. And these 2 can you combine? Yes, you can combine. Then the resulting will be a quadrilateral. Okay? Now, the elements having the straight sides are known as the linear elements. So far we have seen 2-dimensional elements. What type of sides they are having? All these sides are straight. So therefore they are said to be linear elements. And similarly, in 1-dimensional elements, the 1-dimensional element is straight. Therefore it is also a linear element. Linear element. Now, these are the 3-dimensional elements. So when we choose 3-dimensional elements, when the geometry of the domain, material properties and the field variables are dependent on 3 independent coordinates, we can choose 3-dimensional elements. When the geometry, material properties and the field variables are dependent on 3 independent coordinates, we choose three-dimensional elements. What are the three independent coordinates? They are the space coordinates. It's x, y and z. Now, this is a three-dimensional element, tetrahedron. Tetrahedron. How many nodes it connects? 1, 2, 3 and 4. 4 nodes are there. It connects 4 nodes. Next one. This is a rectangular prism. It connects how many nodes? See here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It has 8 nodes. Next one. Hexahedron. How many nodes it has? Let us start counting. How many nodes it has? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. 8 nodes it connects. These are the three-dimensional elements. We can use these elements to discretize a three-dimensional domain. A three-dimensional domain. Hexahedron replaces 5 tetrahedron elements. Hexahedron replaces 5 tetrahedron elements. Now, some three-dimensional problems can be described by one or two independent coordinates. Such problems can be modeled by using axisymmetric or ring type of elements. Some three-dimensional problems can be modeled as axisymmetric problems. Example. So take a cylinder. Take a cylinder. Assume that the cylinder contains fluid under pressure. When it contains fluid under pressure, the wall of the cylinder must be strong enough to support the fluid under pressure. Then only it works safely, otherwise it bursts. So this is the axisymmetric problem. The reason is here, cylinder is an axisymmetric solid. Examples for axisymmetric solids. Cylinder, so cone, it is an axisymmetric solid. Sphere, it is an axisymmetric solid. A sphere with a hollow portion at the interior you can use to store fluid under pressure. A cone frustum with hollow portion at the interior we can use to store fluid under pressure. Right? So these you can take as the examples for axisymmetric problems. These axisymmetric problems you can convert into two-dimensional problems. One-dimensional problems also, according to the possibility. Right? So therefore, we can use axisymmetric or ring type of elements. Examples are piston, storage tank, valve and nozzle. Now, this is one-dimensional axisymmetric element. See here. One-dimensional axisymmetric element. This we can choose to discretize one-dimensional axisymmetric domain. I tell you. One-dimensional axisymmetric domain. For example, this is a cylinder. Assume that the thickness of the wall is very small. Then, to discretize this, one-dimensional axisymmetric element you can choose. How? You can divide like this. Like this you can. One-dimensional axisymmetric elements we can choose. From here to here, this is element 1, this is element 2, element 3, element 4, element 5, element 6. This is the finite element modeling. If you separate this element and draw a figure, it appears like this. Assume that the thickness of the wall is very small. One-dimensional axisymmetric element. Okay. Next one. Two-dimensional axisymmetric element. Why we say two-dimensional axisymmetric element? Because the section of this element is a triangle. How many nodes it has? This triangle has 3 nodes. Node 1, node 2 and node. Node 1, node 2, node. Right? Two-dimensional axisymmetric element. Next one. Sometimes we observe the domains or the geometries of the domains with curved boundaries. Then, what type of elements we can choose? Example is a spring. If you observe a spring, its wire is coiled in the form of. So here, body of the spring represents a domain. So when you consider this problem, how you discretize the body of the spring? Because the wire is curved, it is bent in the form of helix. What type of element you choose? That is the question. This is the reason why for the domains having curved boundaries or for the geometries having the curved boundaries, we can choose the higher order elements, the elements having the curved sides. Higher order elements are the elements having the curved sides. Let us take this. This is the curved line element. How many nodes it has? 3 nodes. These higher order elements contain nodes, mid-side nodes. Because this is one-dimensional, because this is the curved line element, it contains an interior node here at the midsection. Hence, how many nodes are there? 1, 2, 3. This is the curved line element. Next one. See this. This is an angular element. How many nodes it has? 1, 2, 3 and 4. You can use this type of element to model or to idealize a circular plate having hollow portion at the center. Example, I draw the figure. I take a circular plate like this with hollow portion at the center. Now for finite element modeling, what you do? You have to divide this hollow circular plate into several subdomains. What is the sortable element? This is the sortable element. Hence I can divide like this. I can divide like this. How many elements are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 elements. Angular element is the suitable element for finite element modeling of a hollow circular plate. Okay, next one. Next one is a plane triangle with curved sides. It has 3 nodes at the corners and 3 nodes at the midsections. In total, how many nodes are there? 6 nodes. In total, 6 nodes are there. This is a plane triangle with curved sides. Right? Now, when we choose this type of element, You can choose this type of element for a domain having a shape of this type, for example. Here, the boundary of the domain is curved. So therefore, you can choose like this. This is one element. Like this. Second element. Third element. There are three plane triangles with curved sides. Right? Three plane triangles with curved sides. This is the domain which is discretized into three subdomains. Three finite elements are there. So can you discretize this domain using a triangle with straight sides? No, not possible. Let us try. Again, I take the same domain with a different sides. We have linear two-dimensional elements. The basic form is triangle. Triangle consists of straight sides like this with three nodes. When I discretize this with triangle having straight sides like this, then what happens? There is some unfilled region between the boundary of the domain and the boundary sides of the triangles. Observe carefully. This is the reason why a triangle with straight sides is not the right choice. A triangle with curved sides is the right choice. This is the reason why when you solve a problem using finite element method, choosing the element is the first step. You have to choose the suitable element. Choice of the element is the first step. You have to choose the element suitably, otherwise it is wrong solution. It is wrong solution. You have to choose the finite element correctly, otherwise it is wrong solution. So plane triangle with curved sides. Next. This is a tetrahedron with curved sides. So this type of element we can choose to idealize three-dimensional domains having the curved surfaces, curved boundary surfaces. See here, how many nodes it contains? Let us start counting. Let us start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 nodes at the element corners. Next. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 6 nodes on the mid-sections of the edges of the element. Edges of the element. In total, how many nodes are there? 10 nodes. This is a higher order element, which is a three-dimensional element, a tetrahedron with curved sides. We can use this element to model three-dimensional domains. Higher order elements give better approximations, better solutions. Therefore, we prefer higher order elements. Next. Rectangular shell element. It has how many nodes? 4 nodes. Rectangular shell element. We can use this type of element for the shells having thin shells. For the shells having very small thickness. Right? So I take an example. So this is a shell. A thin shell. A thin shell. Right? So now, You can discretize like this shell. You can discretize like this. So this is an element, the shell element. Element 1, element. How many nodes it has? 3 nodes. This type of element you can choose for thin shell. This is second element. This is third element. Similarly, 4th, 5th, 6th. You can discretize the domain, the surface of this thin shell into several subdomains. This one. Next, doubly curved triangle. It has how many nodes? 6 nodes. 3 nodes at the element corners and 3 more nodes at the mid sections of the sides. Next, hexahedron with curved sides. Hexahedron with curved sides. This we can use to model 3-dimensional domains. Next, axisymmetric ring element with curved triangular section. This element we can use for axisymmetric problems. Next one, truncated conical shell element. If the domain is in the form of the frustum of a cone, then you can use this. Frustum of a cone, then you can use this. So what is cone frustum? If you take a plane parallel to the base of the cone and cut the apex part, the part that lies below the plane of cut, what is called cone frustum. Take a cone, take a plane of cut parallel to the base and remove the apex, cut the apex. Then the part that lies below the plane of cut is the cone frustum. If the domain is in the form of a cone frustum, then you can use this type of element to discretize truncated conical shell element. So far we have discussed about the types of elements. We have seen the 1-dimensional elements, 2-dimensional elements and 3-dimensional elements. We have seen both linear elements and higher order elements. Linear elements possess straight sides. Higher order elements possess curved sides and also they contain mid-side nodes. Now we shall see the discretization process. The phenomenon of discretization. What is discretization process? It is the phenomenon of dividing the domain into subdomains. To discretize the domain, you have to choose the suitable element first. The type of the element is important. Second one, size of the element. Size of the element also plays an important role because when you choose the elements with smaller sizes, the number of elements will increase, then the computation time increases. Then the computers require more storage. So this is the reason why engineers have to work with fewer elements for better solutions. Thereby the computation time is also decreasing. And third, where you choose the node, that is also a question. So selection of the node. Next, how you number the nodes, another question. So all these we discuss in discretization process. Firstly we see the types of elements. We have a structure here. This kind of structure you might have seen, you might have observed. Okay. This is a 3-dimensional structure. And these are the forces acting. These are the forces acting. We observe the power transmission lines. power transmission lines, we observe the structures like this. The tensions in the power cables are the forces acting on the structure. So what are the forces acting on the structure? The tensions in the wires, the wind pressure, when the air flows from one place to the other place with high speed. So wind pressure also is another force. Sometimes it rains. Therefore, the pressure of the falling water also we have to consider. Sometimes we observe heavy rains. That also we have to observe. So these are all the forces acting on the structure. To support these forces, we make very strong foundation. For any structure, foundation is very, very important. One should not make weak foundation. Very strong foundation one has to make. Foundation is very, very important. Even if the foundation is strong, the parts of the structure must be able to support the forces acting on the structure. Therefore, each element must be strong and stiff. That is the reason why each element is important here. This structure has several joints here. These are all the integral parts, like human body parts. Human body has several parts, all are integrated. All are integral parts. Head, it is not detachable and attachable. But you can move your head like this. Human body parts are integrated and they can work relatively. But here, these are the parts integrated, but they do not move relatively. Therefore, it is the structure. No. Which has several joints. Maybe bolted joints or riveted joints. No. So here, if you disassemble all the parts, this is the assemblies. If you disassemble, how it may appear like this. So from here to here, you can consider as one element, one finite element. Right? From here to here, another finite element. From here to here, one more element. This is how we have to discretize this structure into subdomains. Now, from here to here, this is the element, one more element. So if you start counting, this is one element, first element, say second element, third element, like this, fourth element. What type of element it is? As a bar element, line element. Hence you can say idealization using bar element. Bar elements we can use. Next one. Beam. This beam has one end fixed. At the other end, there are two forces acting vertically downward. Hence, how it looks as a cantilever. As a cantilever. How can you idealize this domain? This is the domain. Body of the beam is the domain. A three-dimensional domain it is. It is not a two-dimensional domain. It is not a one-dimensional domain. A three-dimensional domain. Therefore, how you idealize like this? You can discretize this domain into many subdomains using 3D elements. 3D elements, three-dimensional elements. Each element appears in this form. Observe carefully. A three-dimensional element. Right? Next one. Now see this domain. So this is a thin walled shell. Okay. Now, its outer surface is under the action of certain pressure. Consider that it is the wind pressure. Say wind pressure, P. Assume that its intensity is same everywhere. and the action of wind pressure is normal to the surface at the point of contact. Right? Now, so thin walled shell is the domain. How you discretize? Say here, you can use a triangle with straight sides like this. You can discretize it. See, there is some mistake here. These 2 points must coincide. There is some correction in this figure. Observe carefully. Like this. Like this. Like this. These 2 nodes must coincide. These 3 must coincide. These 3 must coincide. There is some correction. Observe. Like this. You can discretize the body of thin walled shell into subdomains using a flat triangle. A triangle with 3 straight sides. If you want better approximations, go for curved triangular elements. Then you can idealize the whole domain without leaving a small region. Then you get better approximations. See how the body of the shell is discretized into a curved triangular element using curved triangular elements. Okay. Now, this is a spring. A spring consists of a coiled wire, and this is a compression spring, therefore it supports only compressive force. How you can idealize? See here. You can idealize this wire taking a line element like this. It connects 2 nodes, each node having 6 degrees of freedom. For better approximations, instead of taking a line element, you can choose a curved element like this. From here to here, one element, curved element. From here to here, another curved line element. Second, third, fourth. This is how you can discretize curved element, curved line element. It connects 2 nodes. Each node has 6 degrees of freedom. This is node 1. How many translations it has? 3 translations and 3 rotations. Therefore, 6 degrees of freedom. This has 6 degrees of freedom. This node has 6 degrees of, in total 12. Okay. Now, size of the element, as I said, size of the element also plays an important role. Any problem you can take and solve it by exact method of solution. Then you get exact solution. If the exact solution is not possible, then you have to go for approximate solution. That is what we learned very beginning. Finite element method gives approximate solution. When the size of the element increases, what happens? When the size of the element decreases, what happens? That is what we would like to learn here. Everybody has to choose an element, a suitable element with correct size. When the size of the element decreases, number of elements increases when you idealize the same domain. I take number of elements on the axis and solution as the ordinate. When you solve the problem by any exact method of approach, you get the an exact solution like this. Exact method of approach does not involve any finite element. Finite element method gives you approximate solution. And you can obtain solution for the same problem by exact method of approach if possible. For example, we assume that the exact method of solution is possible. Then you get a solution. This line represents an exact solution. This line represents exact solution. When you increase the number of elements, analyzing the same domain, the size of the element decreases. Therefore, with increasing number of elements or with decreasing size of the element, what happens? The finite element solution converges towards the exact solution. It converges towards the exact solution. Therefore, what happens? The error is decreasing. What is the error here? The exact solution minus the finite element solution. That is the error. Error is the difference of the solution obtained from exact method of approach. Error is the difference of the solution obtained from exact method of approach and the solution obtained from finite element method. That is the error. Therefore, the error decreases when you increase the number of elements. And after certain number of elements, what happens now? The error remains constant. Error remains constant. Therefore, the number of elements beyond which the error remains constant is very, very important. Beyond this number, you need not increase the number of elements. Even if you increase, you get the same solution. Unnecessarily, if you increase beyond this number, what happens? The computation time increases. The cost of solution increases. So this is another problem. This is another problem. Understand? So therefore, here size of the element is very, very important. We have to choose the size of the element suitably. Otherwise, the computation time increases. I hope you understand this. When the number of elements increases, the finite element solution converges towards the exact solution, and beyond certain number of elements, the error remains constant. Therefore, the number of elements beyond which the error remains constant is very, very important. Beyond this number, you should not increase the number of elements. Even if you increase, you get same solution, but the cost of solution increases because the computation time increases. So when you idealize, sometimes the domains having the holes. Example, a plate having a centric hole. The elements at distant locations you can take with bigger size, and the elements in the neighboring of the centric hole, the elements around the centric hole you have to take with smaller size, because around this hole the stress concentrations are present. That is the reason why around this hole you have to take the elements with a smaller size, whereas at the distant locations you can take elements with bigger size. What it tells is the elements with the different sizes also we can choose. So when you discretize a domain of this kind, this is the example for a plate loaded in tension. The plate consists of a centric hole. Wherever the holes are there, stress concentrations are present. Wherever the notches are there, stress concentrations are present. Wherever stress concentrations are present, you have to choose elements with smaller size. Be careful. Right? Next one. Aspect ratio. Very, very important. Aspect ratio is another consideration. What it describes? The shape of the element in assemblies of elements. Aspect ratio for a two-dimensional element is taken as the ratio of the largest dimension of the element to the smaller dimension. For a two-dimensional element is defined as the ratio of largest dimension of the element to the smallest dimension. Elements with an aspect ratio of unity generally yield better solutions. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much.